Okay, so Rob and I are here to do a retrospective. I figured we just finished our or one piece of a project um, using N8N instead of what we would traditionally do Laravel for this part of the project. So Rob, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll dig into the details.
Of course. Hello, I'm Rob. I have been working with Al for a few years now. We started working back in when we were together at Pfizer, I think.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun with several projects. And traditionally, we have always used the same tooling. So Laravel plus uh, MySQL, Postgres, and
Yeah,
the usual
Vue.js.
stack, the Vue.js, yeah.
Yeah.
Right now we are using most of inertia.
Yeah, totally.
And well, with a combination of also Vue.js and trying to pivot to Filament.
Yeah.
Having
Oh
said
yeah,
that,
Filament. Yeah, good point.
yeah, having said that, Filament was our first step towards like simplifying our workflows versus creating custom front ends from scratch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are recently delving into N8N and AI coding, so it's been fun. And
All right.
yeah,
It's a good point though about Filament, right? Like we stepped into Filament, we committed to it last year, and we just said, hey, how do we code less? How do we stop having different styles of code? How do we simplify our projects?
yeah,
How do we just basically get what our clients want quicker?
exactly.
Filament is a tricky commitment because it is still a little bit, a learning curve there.
Yeah.
So that was our first big step. But then I think recently N8N came in. And so in this particular project that the client wanted, I think would you have traditionally reached for Laravel for digging into? So basically they were asking us to use a external API to gather some data for them based on the particular query the user was doing in the user interface we built in Inertia, right?
Yeah.
So would you have typically reached for Laravel for that?
Yes. Usually it's very quick to spin up a new project, throw up some controllers with the HTTP client and just fetch data. Not necessarily authenticated or paginated, cached or anything, just like a quick and dirty wrapper. But it's still a lot of work. Like you have to scaffold the project, you have to potentially create a migration, install dependencies, a lot of like brain power to use just to make like a small call to an API.
Yeah. And we'll touch on this in a moment. Like this is a good example of N8N versus AI, cursor AI, for example, that code this out for us, right? But we'll keep talking about N8N for a moment. So in this particular case, you, because I said to, used N8N to talk to this API and create basically a proxy API for you then to have the Inertia UI talk to. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And at first, I didn't have a lot of N8N experience, to be honest. I had used it for simple stuff. But starting to work with the HTTP node there, it was both easy and it's like easy to get started, but hard to master. Because I started having issues with some connectivity or like the allowed origins, the course settings. But then just either looking at the documentation, so playing around with the interface, you find basically everything you need. And there was already an option to allow every origin. So that solved a lot of the issues.
Yeah.
And initially it was a bit hard or a little overwhelming to see like the entire list of available nodes, and some of the nodes are pretty similar, but the end results are different. For example, I had an issue where I tried to aggregate like the results into a single collection.
Yeah.
And there are like 3 different nodes that help you with that. But in the end, it's just mostly either trial and error or read a lot of the docs.
Yeah, I mean, you ended up in. I'll try to share my screen and show this, or do it in B-roll. But you did end up with a pretty nice, clean, you know, workspace where you basically have two particular webhooks ready to use, right?
Yes, I actually enjoyed that a lot because initially I didn't know we could have multiple triggers
Yeah,
in a
neither
same
did I.
workflow.
Yeah,
And I see that by default, if you want to add like a custom parameter to your webhook URL,
Yeah.
N8N automatically prepends like a UUID to it for some
Yeah.
reason. And
Yeah.
so I was starting to have issues trying to like connect the APIs because if you use different workflows, then the ID you get is different for each endpoint. So it was a bit like awkward to have a lot of UUIDs for each endpoint. So I tried and was able to just get there we go. Yeah, the multiple entry points, let's call them, in the same view, so they all share the same space ID, and that makes it really easy. It's not just like a OCD thing. It's more likely the setup in your own application when you give the base URL. Then it's easier to have one rather than change the IDs.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's looking at it. You don't need to know how to code to understand what's happening, and I think that's one of the biggest wins too, because it's all like a drop down. It everything has like help, and you can watch step by step. It's really really good, and I really like
like you said, it is hard at first to really, you know, that's what turned me off from these no code solutions for years was I felt like I could write it quicker, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And in this case, you're just doing HTTP, and that's another thing that Laravel has a nice client for. So, you know, the thing that wins me over other than the awesome AI agent is all those integrations, which are kind of overwhelming, like you said, right?
Yes.
Right. But in this case, you didn't even use those. You just used their HTTP system to create something that, again, we would wonder, could you have done it in code quicker and easier? And I think the second part to that question or answer is like, but then we have this history of execution. We have less code to maintain, and you and I can then more easily jump on each other's, like, you know, infrastructure or code or whatever to see, like, hey, what did he do? How did he do it? How do I fix it? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. For one part, it definitely is faster to, once you are used to N8N, to just build it here. Like, I found that it's pretty good for rapid prototyping. Like, you can whip up really fast, even like forms that allow you to upload files and handle all that logic. So that's immediately really good, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you still need to code a little bit in your application, like a really simple way to fetch the data.
Yeah.
But what I found, even if you have to do it twice, once in NNN and another time in Laravel or whatever, is that, as you said, our N8N application is basically like a man in the middle, like a proxy between us and them. So we can do very cool stuff. The one thing that I did on that particular workload you showed was automatic pagination. So we didn't even have to read the docs or anything. Just select an option and instruct the node how the data looks, and it just works.
Wow.
So that was very,
Was it this one here?
Someone's friends, there we go. So the response contains the URL, and then you point exactly where, and it just picks it up. So it's a bit, to be honest, it's a bit tricky to set up at first. And I wasn't really following any tutorials or docs. I was just clicking around and figuring things out. But that's the valuable thing too, that you can do that if you are more of the thinker. This is like a playground.
Yeah. No, it's a
So-
tough one. I got stuck with that on a different project, and I forget where I ended up. Probably not that clean though, and it was like my first N8N use case, and I honestly forget what happened there, but I think that's nice how you did it there, that it worked out. So
There's a lot of ways to do it. I was trying with an aggregator, but then the workflow looked really complicated. Like a node had like different connections and loops and But yeah.
Well, I've looked at other people's N8Ns, and I'm like, yeah, you can tell the difference when someone's used to coding, because their N8N will typically be a little bit more I would say just simplistic or tighter, or just more, like it is tricky when you walk away and have it looking really complex. You gotta wonder why.
Yes.
So do you think, so let's see. So basically, what was your biggest what was your big aha moment here? Did you have one where you're like, yeah, this works?
The first one I had was when I noticed the webhooks that could be like
in one workspace.
One workspace.
Yeah.
And that just made me feel like, okay, maybe we can use this to rapidly create, instead of using like Postman, for example, just create all the endpoints we need for a given API here. And even if we don't need to use it more than once, it's useful just for testing, or for example, if we want to improve it later, we can just grab the existing nodes, duplicate them, modify them, hook them up, and just try again, right? That was my first wow, this is really useful, because we can copy them, duplicate, share them, whatever. The other one was with the way the API wrapper worked. Having it ping the endpoint, return information to you is like the basic work, and that's fine. But it gives us so much potential to implement neat things without code. Leveraging that we are a man in the middle. So for example, we already have the workflow for fetching a friend. But what if we also want to cache that result internally? Instead of doing it in Laravel, we can do it in Supabase or whatever mechanism we have, right? If we want to implement a security policy, like authentication, anything that we want to do, or even automate that webhook, that workflow, and use it as a new node, like a custom node. If there's something you don't have and you create a workflow, then you can use that workflow for like a node. It's the amount of possibilities is very limitless, I would say.
And no, that's a good point. In the do you think did you have any negatives you walked away with?
The main one, I don't know if I need to look it up more, but I think it would be good to have some kind of version control system within the canvas itself, because we do have the executions, but it's not immediately clear what changed between one workflow and the other. And if you have a very big workflow with tons of nodes and you change one of them, which
even
one
by
and
accident.
what
I know
exactly, and there's no visibility on changes. I think.
No, it's a good point. If you buy the license, I think GitHub integration is there.
I see.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, speaking of the license, 'cause I was thinking of that a moment ago, is that it keeps coming up, is in this particular case, the API you were talking to, I forget, did they have credentials for that, or was it? Yeah, we had to pass through credentials, right?
We had a token. Yeah.
So this is a perfect example of where N8N's license would come into effect. So if you and I were selling this as a service, and we were making this standalone application that we could onboard customers to, we would be breaking their policy. But in this particular case, this is the customer's N8N. This is hosted on their servers. This is something we built for them, and we're not charging them for monthly use. It's like, here you go use it. So in this particular case, it's a good example of where the license worked out. So that was just a thought there, as I have had a couple of people ask about where does this license stand versus Laravel, which is truly open source.
I see.
Yeah, that was a tricky one, and
Yeah,
I've been doing research. I even talked to them yesterday, someone there, and just got more clearance about it, or a clearer look at it. So how did you use the execution and debugging area at all?
A lot, yes.
Yeah.
When figuring out some issues, whenever we run the webhook automatically via the backend service in Laravel or whatever, sometimes we would hit either rate limiting errors or like an edge case with the input data. So having the execution log readily available was really great, because you can not only see where it failed, but like exactly the data flow. So you see the literal like query string and how it starts converting and where it failed.
And and it's funny because that's a game changer to me. Again, no code, we can all jump in and fix things, but we also can see what's going wrong. And it's funny because there's so many external services that people pay for in Laravel to get this, and you still can't get this, right?
Yeah.
So, Sentry's so integral to Laravel that they became partners. And so here we are sitting with a dashboard that just has everything built in. So it's a reminder that the success of Laravel is these third-party pay-for solutions, or some of them are free, but that you have to put together. So when they say batteries included, it is an advantage to Laravel, but that the batteries are included, right? But there's more to it than just the batteries, and obviously there's an ecosystem in Laravel making lots of money that make it a full product, and I think we're seeing a lot here as well for free. So one example too of that, now I think about it, is you had a while back, you had a lot of trouble with Mailtrap webhooks, right? So I did a video on moving that whole system over to N8N because I realized, why are we doing all this? Because even that was our evolution of Filament only. Boom, this is easy. But even then it was hard. So I moved everything over within a day to N8N, and the webhooks were easy as could be. Because like you said, I said, hey, Mailtrap, hit this webhook. And then when it hit it, I got to see the shape of the data coming in through the pass execution and then build around that. So, like, do you think this would have helped in your webhook?
No, absolutely. Like, even that little part you just mentioned, like, when you go set up your webhook and they ask you the URL and the events they want to send you and a test button, for example, if you wanted to do that traditionally in Laravel, you would need to create a web route, a controller, like a logger, a way to get that data. But with N8N, it's just create a webhook, paste the URL, and that's it. So definitely it was very much a time saver, and the visibility it gives you is just fantastic to start actually thinking about the solutions to the problems you're given. Because if the problem is, oh crap, I can see the data and I need to spend half an hour to see the data, then you lose your original train of thought because you were solving other stuff.
In that particular situation, you can even drag and drop the incoming values into the right areas. It's pretty crazy.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but on what you just said, it like, and this goes into the next and probably the ending part of this, is just like every day we wake up with a bit of mental energy that's like a bar. It's like our game bar. It's green. It shows our life levels. In that half hour you would spend to line everything up brings your bar down, right? Yeah. So in that particular case, you're able to just not do that, right? You're able to just save that energy for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, or nothing, right?
Yeah.
Now, with that said, we're also hitting these moments where we're using cursor AI and in AI to code our stuff. So from a back-end standpoint, you could use cursor to do a lot of that. And then the front end. So N8N in some ways has competition in 2025 with just AI coding everything. Even I struggle sometimes being like, hey, I'm going to build this in Cursor. When do I use N8N? When do I use Cursor?
Yes.
How has your use of Cursor been so far in these projects? In that project, for example?
It's been honestly very mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Just like N8N, I think the potential is there, and you initially just have to like spend time and effort trying to understand the change in mentality, because going against established experience and patterns, like I have 15 years of experience coding a certain way, and then coming in with a new AI tool and just changing that entirely is difficult. But the way I have been using Cursor, and a point I wanted to make regarding like no code versus being a developer, and probably where the new generation should be focusing their efforts to, is that I've noticed that using AI tools for no code purposes is good, and they can give you good results with an easy prompt, let's say.
Yeah.
But the more experience you have, and the more vision you have gained over the years, to see how things would move and know all the moving pieces, helps tremendously to actually give commands to the AI, or give a better prompt. So I've noticed that I have improved my technical writing skills by using Cursor, because giving it a pretty well detailed report of an issue, or like a feature request or something like that, and just pointing it to the correct entry points for a controller, a migration, a model, anything like that, whips up something that I would take like 2 hours in like one prompt. And it's not perfect, obviously. We are not yet in the AGI era. But again, having experience coding gives you more visibility and more tools to actually correct the LLM. And what I noticed is that my coding sessions have changed. Instead of me like breaking my brains trying to figure out an algorithm, a syntax, or a for loop, or you just like squinting your eyes to find like a missing column. Now it's more like delegating and talking to a teammate. So you are like, hey, I can solve this, and you try to explain, and then you change the explanation, and often you find a solution.
No, it's an interesting point. You're staying more at the domain level. You're staying more at the understanding the goals of the business owner, right?
Yes.
And you're not getting lost in the deep dive of how to make this collection output what you want, right?
Exactly.
And it's interesting too, because someone recently was telling me about how they love getting in the flow as a developer, and I'm like thinking that's going to change. We're not going to go. It's a different flow. It's just different. Like you're just in a flow of like talking and sometimes waiting and then helping guide it again, like autonomous driving, but you still have your hands on the wheel.
Exactly.
No, it's a good point too. It's like we get lost in those deep dives, and then we come out and we're like, what were we doing again? What were we building? And it's easy to get lost. I think one thing that came out of that too for you and I is front end work. We were able to build JavaScript stuff more efficiently, or do things we normally wouldn't have done before.
Yes, actually, I think it's a very good thing that it supports cloud with Vision. So I have actually took screenshots of like at the page and be like, hey, this is wrong, fix it. Boop, it just does it. I actually worked more on front-end than back-end recently with Cursor, because changing and improving the UX of a site has become really easy, because you can just iterate really fast and try out the results, right? So I have enabled a lot of really complicated UI lately. You have seen some of it, like dynamic drop downs with custom selections that affect other
Yeah.
So it's very tricky, and
Yeah.
like I can do it. I mean, I did it because I know
Yeah, I
how the
know.
results should know.
But how much did your green bar go down, right? It's like
exactly?
and
No,
like yeah, like look at headless UI. I'm like I appreciate those people made that for us, but I've never walked away from using headless UI refreshed. I'm like, holy crap.
yeah.
That did not work like theirs. Yeah.
Every
so
time
you
I
did well
had
there.
tried,
Yeah.
every time I had tried to use headless UI manually, for example,
Yeah.
I just get lost because it's a lot of like components nested within each other. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like one thing I really like to do with Cursor is you can index documentation. So I just go to, for example, Tailwind, Inertia, Laravel, whatever, copy the URL, paste it in Cursor in indexes, and then I just mention it in the Composer or chat window.
Yeah.
And it picks it up. Like it uses RAG, so it knows exactly which documentation page to use.
Yeah, I was wondering how they did that. It's a good point. Yeah.
It's pretty wild, and in the end, since you are passing literally the documentation of the tools you are using, you are getting, I don't want to say perfect code, but very close to what the product actually needs, right? And that makes it easier to debug, to actually go in and correct issues yourself, or to just speak to the LLM and be like, hey, no, that's wrong. Do it this way.
And when did we ever have perfect code? Every 6 months we look back at our code and like, what was I thinking? So on a final question, like, what do you see changing for you in 2025 with everything the way it's going?
Honestly, I have started thinking that my hardcore coding days are mostly over, and I'm changing to my more of like a maestro, like a concert guiding person, because I can just guide the LLM in this case to create or to start or to like scaffold the initial like blunt of required work and boilerplate code for a feature, and then just spend my energy, my expertise, and my everything into actually making sure that the feature itself works as intended.
No, that's a good point.
What the client needs.
No, it's a really good point. And we spend a lot of time at the end of building something not doing that or we spend little time because we're so tired or hyper focused on just getting this thing across the line that we forgot, that button doesn't look right when they hover over it or something. Or, it's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself by the end of 2025 getting to a place where it's all AI, where you don't have to code at all, you're just giving it the domain?
I see myself actually going more like 80-20, like 80% yes, not coding at all and just getting the AI, but 20% yes, still myself being like
no, it's interesting. All right, I mean that's great, it was good to do this before we step into the next project because what did we learn? These retros are good. All right, well, thanks. I'll post this today as on the podcast. Yeah, so.
Excited.